When he said it, he didn't whisper. He said it like it was common knowledge, like mentioning the weather or asking if I needed milk from the store. The casualness of it hit me harder than any confession ever could have. This wasn't a secret being revealed. This was just Tuesday morning, and everyone knew except me. I was standing in line at the coffee shop on Market Street, the one with the chipped tile floor and the barista who always spelled my name wrong. Nothing special about the morning. I'd woken up late, thrown on yesterday's jeans, and decided I needed caffeine more than I needed to look presentable. These were the kinds of decisions that felt normal 6 months ago, before I started questioning whether anything in my life was actually mine to decide. The line moved slowly. I was scrolling through my phone, half reading headlines about politicians I didn't trust and celebrities I didn't care about, when someone tapped my shoulder. Marcus. I knew him from the neighborhood, one of those people you see at the grocery store and the dry cleaner, familiar enough for small talk but not much else. His wife worked at the same school as my sister, safe territory for conversation. He smiled that polite smile people use when they're not sure if you remember their name. I did, barely. We'd talked maybe 3 times in the past year, usually about parking or the construction noise from the apartment complex going up 2 blocks over. "Hey," he said, glancing around like he was checking to see who might overhear us. "How are you holding up with everything?" The question felt loaded in a way I couldn't identify. Everything. What everything? I was holding up fine with my life, thank you very much. Sure, David and I had been going through some rough patches lately, but that was normal for couples who'd been together 5 years. We were working through it. At least I thought we were. "I'm okay," I said, because that's what you say when someone asks how you're holding up and you don't know why they're asking. Marcus nodded, but his expression stayed concerned in that pitying way that made my stomach turn. "It's good that you're taking care of yourself. I mean, after finding out about the apartment and everything." The apartment. My brain did that thing where it tries to catch up with information it should already have. What apartment? We lived in a house. David's house, technically, but we'd been talking about putting my name on the deed once we figured out the paperwork. What apartment was Marcus talking about? I must have looked confused because he tilted his head slightly, studying my face. "You do know about the apartment, right? The one on Elm Street." Elm Street. I knew Elm Street. It was 15 minutes from our house, closer to downtown. There were some nice buildings there, mostly young professionals and graduate students. I'd driven past those buildings hundreds of times. Sometimes David would point out architectural details or mention how much the rent probably cost. "What about it?" I asked, though part of me was already understanding that I didn't want to hear the answer. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked uncomfortable now, like he was realizing he'd stepped into something messier than he'd anticipated. "I thought you knew. Sarah mentioned seeing you there a few months back. She assumed you were checking it out together." Sarah, his wife, the one who worked with my sister. The pieces were connecting in a way that made my chest feel tight. Checking what out? The place David's been renting, Unit 4B, I think. Sarah said she saw you in the lobby back in September. The coffee shop noise faded into background static. Unit 4B, September. I tried to remember where I was in September, what I was doing, whether David had mentioned anything about Elm Street or apartments or reasons to be in a lobby I'd never seen. "I've never been in that building," I said quietly. Marcus blinked. "Oh, maybe Sarah was mistaken. She said she waved, but you seemed distracted." But I knew Sarah hadn't been mistaken. Sarah had seen someone who looked like me, someone who belonged in that building, someone who had every reason to be there, someone who knew about Unit 4B. The line moved forward. I ordered my usual coffee, extra shot of espresso, no sugar. My hands were steady when I handed over my card, steady when I signed the receipt, steady when I took the cup from the barista who had, once again, spelled my name with an I instead of a Y. Everything was steady except the ground beneath my feet, which felt like it was shifting in small, persistent ways. Marcus had ordered behind me, and we walked toward the door together. He was talking about something else now, the weather or weekend plans, but I wasn't listening. My mind was stuck on September, trying to piece together what David had been doing on the days he said he was working late, or meeting with clients, or running errands that took longer than expected. "I thought you knew." Those 4 words kept echoing. Not "I thought you suspected," or "I thought he told you." I thought you knew, past tense. Like this was old information, something that had been settled months ago, something so established that it was strange I wasn't already aware of it. Outside the coffee shop, Marcus stopped walking. "Are you okay? You look a little pale." I wanted to tell him I was fine, that there had been some misunderstanding, that David and I were happy and stable, and there was no apartment on Elm Street that mattered to my life. Instead, I heard myself ask, "How long has he been renting it?" Marcus's face went through several expressions quickly: confusion, realization, regret. "I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry. I just assumed." "How long?" "Since the summer, I think. Maybe June." Sarah mentioned it because she was surprised to see someone she knew in that building. She'd been thinking about moving there herself before they decided to buy the house. June. 4 months of David paying rent on an apartment I didn't know existed. 4 months of him having a place to go that wasn't our home, that wasn't anywhere I would think to look for him. 4 months of him having a key to a door I'd never seen. I thanked Marcus for the coffee shop encounter, though I wasn't sure why. He looked like he wanted to say something else, maybe apologize again, or offer to clarify details he didn't actually have. But I was already walking away, heading back to my car with a cup of coffee I no longer wanted and information I wasn't ready to process. The drive home took 12 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard, focusing on the numbers changing as a way to avoid thinking about anything else. 11:47 became 11:59. 12 minutes to travel from not knowing to knowing, though I wasn't sure yet what exactly I knew. Our house looked the same when I pulled into the driveway. Blue shutters, white trim, the small garden David had planted last spring, because he said it would make the front yard more welcoming. The garden was dying now, November having taken its toll on the flowers, but neither of us had mentioned replanting or cleaning it up. Small signs of neglect that I'd attributed to busy schedules and changing seasons. I sat in the car for a few extra minutes, staring at the front door and trying to decide what to do with what I'd learned. Part of me wanted to go inside and pretend the conversation with Marcus had never happened. Chalk it up to neighborhood gossip or mistaken identity and continue with my day as planned. I had work to catch up on, bills to pay, normal Tuesday afternoon responsibilities that didn't require investigating my boyfriend's potential secret apartment. But another part of me, the part that had been growing louder over the past few months, was tired of pretending things were normal when they didn't feel normal. Tired of explaining away David's late nights and weekend trips and distracted conversations. Tired of being the person who accepted explanations without asking for details. I went inside. David wasn't home, which wasn't surprising since he rarely was during weekday afternoons. His job in consulting required a lot of client meetings, or at least that's what he'd always told me. Flexible schedule, unpredictable hours, the kind of work that justified being unreachable for long stretches of time. The house felt different now that I was looking at it through the lens of what Marcus had told me. Not obviously different, but subtly wrong in ways I couldn't quite identify. Like when you rearrange furniture in a room and it takes several days to figure out why the space feels off. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom we shared, looking for signs of deception or evidence of another life. What was I expecting to find? A lease agreement, keys, photos of the apartment. I didn't even know what I was looking for, which made the search feel both urgent and pointless. In his nightstand drawer, underneath insurance papers and old phone chargers, I found a small notepad with addresses written in David's handwriting. Most of them were familiar: his office, his gym, restaurants we'd been to together. But at the bottom of the list, in slightly faded ink, 847 Elm Street, Unit 4B. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not Sarah confusing me with someone else. I stared at the address until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like proof. David had written this down, had needed to remember this address, had thought about this place, enough to keep the information where he could find it again. My phone buzzed with a text message. David, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner at the Italian place downtown. The same Italian place we'd been going to for 3 years, where they knew our usual order and always brought extra bread. A normal message on a normal Tuesday, except now I was wondering whether he was texting me from the apartment I wasn't supposed to know about. I typed back that I was feeling sick and would probably stay home. Not a lie, exactly. My stomach was churning and my head felt foggy, in the way that happens when you're processing information your brain doesn't want to accept. He responded immediately with concern and offers to bring me soup or medicine. Sweet gestures that felt different now, like kindness with an agenda. Or maybe I was reading too much into everything, looking for signs of deception in places where there might just be genuine care. But I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus saying, "I thought you knew," like it was obvious, like this was information that existed in the world for anyone to stumble across. How many other people knew about the apartment? How many conversations had happened around me where people assumed I was already aware of David's second residence? I spent the rest of the afternoon researching, not detective work exactly, but the kind of casual internet searching that reveals more than you expect it to. Property records, rental listings, social media posts, geotagged to locations that started to form a pattern. The building on Elm Street was nice, recently renovated, secure entry, gym, and rooftop access. The kind of place someone would choose if they wanted privacy and weren't worried about cost. 1-bedroom units rented for nearly $2,000 a month. according to the building's website. Not impossible on David's salary, but expensive enough that it would require planning and commitment. I found photos of the lobby, the same lobby where Sarah had allegedly seen someone who looked like me. Modern furniture, large windows, the kind of space that felt more like a hotel than an apartment building. I tried to imagine David walking through that lobby, taking the elevator to the 4th floor, unlocking a door to a space I'd never seen. What did he keep there? Clothes? Furniture? Did he have a routine there, a version of himself that existed separately from the person who shared my bed and my breakfast table? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one leading to 3 more that I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. By evening, I had constructed several theories about why David might be renting a second apartment: workspace, investment property, surprise gift, storage for furniture or belongings he didn't want cluttering our house. None of them felt convincing, but they were possibilities that didn't require me to fundamentally reconsider our relationship. The problem was that I couldn't ask him about any of them without revealing that I knew about the apartment, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed more information first, more context, more understanding of what exactly I was confronting him about. When David came home that evening, he brought soup from the deli down the street and acted exactly like someone whose girlfriend was sick and needed care. He checked my temperature, made me tea, settled in beside me on the couch with his laptop while I pretended to nap. Normal boyfriend behavior that felt surreal given what I now knew he was hiding. I watched him work, typing emails and reviewing documents, occasionally reaching over to adjust my blanket or ask if I needed anything. His face looked the same as it had that morning, the same as it had yesterday and last week and last month. But now I was studying it for signs of guilt or anxiety or distraction, looking for evidence of a double life in the way he bit his lower lip when concentrating or rubbed his eyes when he was tired. He worked until almost midnight, then closed his laptop and headed to bed. I followed a few minutes later, lying beside him in the dark and listening to his breathing settle into sleep patterns. The same patterns I'd been listening to for 5 years, except now I was wondering whether he slept differently in the apartment on Elm Street, whether he had different habits there, whether he was a different person entirely when he didn't have to consider my presence. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what came next. I could confront him directly, demand explanations, risk whatever came from forcing the conversation into the open. I could continue investigating, try to gather more evidence before making any accusations. I could pretend I'd never spoken to Marcus and hope the knowledge would eventually fade into background noise. But by morning, I knew I couldn't sustain the pretending, not just about the apartment, but about all the small ways I'd been accommodating David's evasiveness over the past few months, the canceled plans and delayed responses and explanations that satisfied him more than they satisfied me. I was tired of being the person who accepted half-truths because asking for the whole truth felt too risky, tired of being kept comfortable instead of being kept informed, tired of discovering that other people knew more about my own life than I did. When David left for work Thursday morning, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to rest, I made a decision. Not to confront him, not yet, but to stop protecting him from consequences he'd created himself, to stop smoothing over inconsistencies that weren't mine to smooth over. I called in sick to work, which wasn't entirely dishonest, since I felt emotionally exhausted and physically drained. Then I drove to Elm Street. The building looked exactly like it had in the online photos. Clean lines, professional landscaping, the kind of place that attracted tenants who valued privacy and could afford to pay for it. I sat in my car across the street for almost an hour, watching people come and go, trying to imagine David as one of the residents. I wasn't planning to go inside. I didn't have a key or a specific plan, or even a clear goal beyond confirming that the building existed and David had some connection to it. But as I was preparing to leave, I saw him, not David, someone else, someone I recognized. She was walking out of the building with a coffee cup and a small bag from what looked like a bakery run. Tall, blonde, wearing the kind of casual clothes that suggested she lived nearby and was comfortable in the neighborhood. She looked familiar in a way that made my brain work to place her, like trying to remember where you've heard a song before. Then it clicked. Amanda, David's coworker, the one he'd mentioned occasionally over the past year, usually in the context of big projects or difficult clients, the one who was supposedly engaged to someone who worked in finance and lived in a different part of the city. Amanda, who was walking out of David's building at 10:30 on a Thursday morning like she belonged there. She crossed the street, heading toward a car parked 2 spaces behind mine. For a moment, I considered ducking down or starting my engine and leaving before she noticed me. But instead, I rolled down my window and called her name. She turned, smiling automatically before recognition set in. Then her expression shifted, not to guilt exactly, but to something more complicated. Surprise mixed with resignation, like she'd been expecting this moment, but hoped it would come later. "Hi," she said, approaching my car but staying a few feet back. "What brings you to this neighborhood?" Such a careful question. Not, "What are you doing here?" or "How did you find this place?" but "What brings you to this neighborhood?" As if my presence could be explained by any number of innocent reasons. "I was just driving around," I said, which was close enough to true. "Looks like a nice area." Amanda nodded, glancing back at the building. "It is very quiet, good restaurants." We stood there for a moment, both of us knowing we were dancing around, something neither wanted to address directly. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands, and I noticed she wasn't wearing an engagement ring. The ring David had mentioned when telling me about her fiancé, the one who worked in finance. "Do you live around here?" I asked, another pause. "Sometimes," she said finally. "I've been staying with a friend while my place gets renovated." A friend, Unit 4B. The apartment David had been paying for since June. I wanted to ask her how long the renovations were taking. I wanted to ask her about the fiancé who worked in finance. I wanted to ask her whether David ever mentioned me when they were together in the apartment I wasn't supposed to know about. Instead, I said, "That's nice that you have somewhere to stay." "Yeah," she said. "David's been really helpful with everything." And there it was, not a confession, but close enough. David's name spoken in a context that confirmed what I'd already figured out, but hadn't wanted to believe. David, who was helpful with Amanda's housing situation. David, who had reasons to spend time in an apartment he'd never mentioned to me. Amanda was still standing beside my car, and I realized she was waiting for me to respond, to get angry or demand explanations, or create the kind of scene that would force everything into the open. But I felt strangely calm, like a fever breaking. The uncertainty was ending, replaced by clarity that felt almost peaceful. "I should go," I said. "It was good seeing you." She looked surprised by my lack of drama, but nodded. "You too. Take care of yourself." I drove home thinking about those last 4 words. Take care of yourself. Not see you soon or give my regards to David. Take care of yourself, like advice for someone who was going to need to be self-sufficient. Like a warning disguised as politeness. Back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Not of confrontation strategies or evidence I'd gathered, but of practical things that would need to be addressed. My lease had expired 6 months ago, and I'd never signed a new one because David had suggested we didn't need the formality. My name wasn't on any utility bills because David had said it was easier to keep everything under his account. I'd merged our grocery shopping and household expenses into his system because it felt more efficient. Small compromises that had seemed reasonable at the time, but now looked like ways I'd made myself dependent without realizing it. Ways I'd accepted convenience over control, efficiency over autonomy. My phone rang. David, checking on how I was feeling. "Much better," I told him, and meant it. "Good. I was thinking about coming home early today. Maybe we could order takeout, watch something mindless." A normal suggestion for a normal evening, the kind of plan we'd made hundreds of times before, settling into our routine of shared meals and shared entertainment and shared space. Except now I understood that our space wasn't actually shared, that David had another life happening in parallel to ours, that the person offering to come home early was the same person who'd been maintaining a relationship I knew nothing about. "That sounds nice," I said, because I wasn't ready to change the dynamic yet. Not over the phone, not without preparation, not until I'd figured out exactly what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. When David came home that evening, he brought Chinese food from our usual place and acted like nothing had changed. Maybe, from his perspective, nothing had. Maybe he'd been managing this double life for so long that it felt sustainable, even normal. Maybe he thought he could continue indefinitely, keeping me comfortable and uninformed while building something else with someone else. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, talking about work and weekend plans, and a movie we'd both heard good reviews about. Surface-level conversation that used to feel comfortable, but now felt like performance. I watched him describe his day, editing out any mention of Elm Street or Amanda, or the life he was living when I wasn't around. He was good at it, I realized, not just the lying, but the compartmentalization. The ability to be fully present in one version of his life, while keeping the other version completely separate. It probably took skill and planning and emotional discipline. It probably took practice. "You seem better tonight," he said as we were cleaning up the dishes. "This morning you looked pretty rough." "I think I just needed time to process some things," I said. He nodded, but something in his expression shifted slightly, like he'd heard something in my tone that made him alert, though he couldn't identify what exactly had changed. We settled on the couch to watch the movie, falling into our usual positions, with me curled against his side and his arm around my shoulders. The same arrangement we'd maintained for years, comfortable and familiar, and now completely hollow. I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek, steady and calm, like someone with nothing to hide. Halfway through the movie, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it quickly, then set the phone face down on the coffee table without responding. "Work?" I asked. "Just spam," he said, but I'd seen enough of the message to catch a name. Amanda. Not work, not spam. The woman who was staying in his apartment while her place got renovated, texting him at 9:30 on a Thursday night, while he was sitting on our couch with his arm around me. I didn't say anything. I stayed curled against him, pretending to watch the movie, while actually thinking about timing and logistics, and how long someone could maintain two separate relationships without either person demanding more honesty or commitment. The movie ended around 11. David suggested we go to bed, and I followed him to our bedroom, brushing my teeth beside him at the bathroom sink, like we'd done thousands of times before. Normal domestic intimacy that felt completely surreal now that I understood how much of his life I wasn't seeing. In bed, he reached for me the way he always did, and I let him. Not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't ready to have the conversation that rejecting him would require. I needed more time to prepare, more clarity about what I wanted to happen next. But lying there afterward, listening to him fall asleep, I felt something shift permanently. The last thread of uncertainty snapping, replaced by cold, clear understanding. This wasn't a relationship I was trying to save anymore. This was a situation I was trying to exit. The next morning, David left for work early, mentioning something about client meetings that might run late. I waited until his car was out of the driveway, then called my sister. "I need to ask you something," I said when she answered. "And I need you to be honest with me, even if you think it might hurt my feelings." "Okay," she said, her voice immediately concerned. "What's going on? What do you know about David and Amanda?" Silence, long enough that I knew she was trying to decide how to respond, which meant she knew something worth considering carefully. "Why are you asking?" she said finally. "Because I found out about the apartment, and because I think you've known about it longer than I have." Another pause, then, "Sarah mentioned seeing you there, but when I asked if you and David were looking at places downtown, you seemed confused, so I figured either you didn't want to talk about it or I didn't know," I finished. "Yeah. How long have you known?" "Since September, maybe." Sarah brought it up because she thought it was weird that you never mentioned moving. She said you looked upset when she saw you in the lobby, and when she tried to wave, you didn't respond. But it hadn't been me in the lobby. It had been Amanda, who looked enough like me from a distance that Sarah had made an understandable mistake. Amanda, who had every reason to look upset about being recognized by someone who knew David's actual girlfriend. "I've never been in that building," I told my sister. "Oh." A long pause while she processed what that meant. "Oh shit." "Yeah." We talked for another 20 minutes, my sister filling in details I hadn't known and confirming suspicions I'd been developing. She'd wondered why I seemed disconnected from decisions about the apartment. She'd thought it was strange that David was taking on extra expenses without talking to me about it. She'd assumed we were having relationship problems we weren't discussing. "Why didn't you ask me directly?" I said. "Because you seemed to want privacy about it, and because I didn't want to pry if you were going through something difficult." Protecting me from information I needed by assuming I already had it. The same mistake Marcus had made, the same pattern that had kept me ignorant, while everyone else drew their own conclusions about what was happening in my relationship. After we hung up, I spent the day making practical preparations. I called my old landlord to ask about available units. I researched moving companies and storage facilities. I opened a bank account that would be solely mine. Small steps toward independence that felt both overdue and terrifying. I also spent time thinking about the conversation I needed to have with David. Not the emotional confrontation where I demanded explanations and apologies, but the practical discussion about ending our arrangement and separating our lives. I wanted to be clear and calm and focused on logistics rather than feelings. By the time David came home that evening, I was ready. He walked in carrying flowers, tulips, my favorite, from the expensive florist downtown. A thoughtful gesture that might have meant something different a week ago, but now felt like either guilt or coincidence. "These are beautiful," I said, accepting the flowers and putting them in water. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just thought you might like them." We made dinner together, the same collaborative cooking routine we'd developed over the years. David chopping vegetables while I managed the stove, both of us moving around the kitchen in familiar patterns that required minimal communication. It should have felt comfortable, but instead it felt like the last performance of something that had already ended. Over dinner, I brought up practical topics, my lease situation, which had been unresolved for months, my car insurance, which was due for renewal, my job, which had been offering opportunities for advancement that would require more commitment, normal life maintenance issues that suddenly felt urgent. David responded to all of it with casual interest, but no particular investment. Like these were my problems to solve, my decisions to make, which was fair enough, but also telling. 6 months ago, he would have offered opinions and suggestions. Now he seemed content to let me manage my own life. "I've been thinking," I said as we were finishing dessert, "that maybe it's time for me to get my own place again." David looked up from his ice cream. "Really? Why?" Such a neutral response. Not "I'd miss you" or "let's talk about this" or "is something wrong?" Just why, like I'd mentioned changing my gym membership or getting a new phone plan. "I think it would be good for me to have more independence," I said, "and more space for my own things." "If that's what you want," he said. "When were you thinking?" "Soon, maybe next month." He nodded, already back to eating his ice cream. "Let me know if you need help with anything." And that was it. No questions about whether this meant we were breaking up. No concern about how this would change our relationship. No curiosity about what had prompted my decision. Just practical acceptance and an offer to help with logistics. I realized then that David had been expecting this conversation, or something like it. He'd been waiting for me to figure out what he couldn't tell me directly. Maybe he'd even been hoping I would, so he wouldn't have to be the one to end things. "There's something else," I said. "I know about the apartment." His spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "What apartment?" Even now, even with the truth hanging in the air between us, he was going to make me say it explicitly. "Unit 4B Elm Street, Amanda." David set down his spoon and looked at me directly for the first time all evening. Not guilty, not defensive, just tired, like he was relieved to stop pretending. "How long have you known?" he asked. "A few days, Marcus told me. Then I saw Amanda coming out of the building." "I was going to tell you." "When?" He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. There had been no plan to tell me, no timeline for honesty, no intention of letting me make informed decisions about our relationship. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "What do I think? That I was cheating, that I was lying to you. Weren't you?" Another pause. "It's complicated." "No, it's not. You've been in a relationship with someone else while maintaining a relationship with me. That's not complicated. That's just dishonest." David rubbed his forehead, the gesture he always made when he was stressed or frustrated. "Amanda and I work together. We've become close, but it's not like we planned for this to happen." "How long?" "Since the summer, but it started as just friendship, just someone to talk to about work stress." "And the apartment?" "Amanda needed somewhere to stay while she figured things out with her ex. I offered to help. By renting her a place and not telling me about it. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." The explanation that made everything worse. He hadn't told me because he knew it would upset me, which meant he'd known it was wrong, but had done it anyway. He'd prioritized my comfort over my ability to make choices about my own life. "So you decided to keep me comfortable and uninformed instead of letting me decide how I wanted to handle the information." "I was trying to protect you." "From what? From reality? From having to deal with the fact that my boyfriend was building a life with someone else?" David didn't respond to that, which was its own kind of response. We sat in silence for several minutes, the remains of dinner growing cold on the table between us. "What do you want to happen now?" he asked finally. "I want you to be honest with me about what you want. Not what you think I want to hear, not what feels safest for you to say. What you actually want." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "I want to try to work things out with Amanda, see if we can build something real." "And us?" "I care about you. I always will. But I think we've been growing apart for a while, and maybe it's better to acknowledge that now instead of trying to force something that isn't working." The relief of finally hearing the truth was almost overwhelming, not because the truth was pleasant, but because it was real. No more careful explanations or partial information or protection from consequences I should have been allowed to face months ago. "Okay," I said. "Okay? Okay, I accept that. I accept that you want to be with Amanda and that our relationship is ending. I accept that you've been dishonest with me, and I accept that you're not going to apologize for it in any way that matters." David looked surprised by my calmness. Maybe he'd been expecting tears or anger or attempts to negotiate, but I felt strangely peaceful, like I'd finally stopped fighting a current that had been pulling me downstream for months. "I'll start looking for a place next week," I said. "I should be out by the end of the month." "You don't have to rush. Take whatever time you need. I think sooner is better for everyone." We finished cleaning up the kitchen in silence, both of us moving carefully around each other like strangers sharing space. David retreated to his laptop, and I went to the bedroom to start mentally cataloging which belongings were mine and which were his. That night, we slept in the same bed but didn't touch. Not because either of us was angry, but because we were finally being honest about what we were to each other. Two people who had shared a life until one of us decided to start a different life without telling the other person. The next morning, David left early again. Another day of client meetings, he said, though I knew now that at least some of those meetings were with Amanda, planning their shared future while I planned my exit from it. I spent the weekend apartment hunting, viewing studios and one-bedrooms that would accommodate the life I was building by myself. Smaller spaces than what I'd gotten used to sharing with David, but also spaces where every decision would be mine to make. By Sunday evening, I'd put a deposit down on a place 6 miles away, close enough that I wouldn't have to change gyms or grocery stores, far enough that I was unlikely to run into David or Amanda during routine errands. A fresh start that didn't require completely rebuilding my life. When David came home Sunday night, I told him I'd found a place and would be moving out the following weekend. He offered to help, and I accepted because it felt like the least complicated way to handle the logistics. "Are you okay?" he asked as we were getting ready for bed. "I'm fine," I said, and meant it. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I feel like I can think clearly for the first time in months. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know, but you did hurt me, and pretending otherwise doesn't change anything." David nodded, but didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. People who spend months deceiving someone they claim to care about don't typically develop sudden insight into the impact of their choices. The following week passed quickly. I packed my belongings, arranged utilities for my new place, updated my address with banks and credit cards, administrative tasks that felt like reclaiming my independence, one form at a time. David and I were polite to each other, but we didn't talk about the relationship or what had gone wrong, or whether things could have been different. Those conversations would have required a level of honesty and self-reflection that I no longer expected from him. On Friday afternoon, as I was loading the last of my boxes into the moving truck, my sister stopped by to help. "How are you doing with all this?" she asked as we carried my desk down the front steps. "Good, actually. Better than I thought I would be." "Really?" I think I'd been preparing for this without realizing it. All those months when things felt off, when David seemed distracted, when I felt like I was trying to save something that was already over. Part of me knew, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. We loaded the truck in relative silence, both of us focused on the physical work of moving. As I was doing a final walkthrough of the house, checking closets and cabinets for anything I might have missed, David appeared in the doorway. "I think that's everything," I said. "Probably." He looked around the bedroom that had been ours for 3 years. "It's going to feel strange without your things here." "You'll get used to it." We stood there for a moment, both of us acknowledging that this was likely the last time we'd be in this space together. Not a particularly emotional moment, but significant in its finality. "I hope things work out with Amanda," I said, and meant it. Not because I forgave him for the dishonesty, but because I wanted him to be happy in whatever life he was choosing to build. "Thank you," he said, "and I hope your new place feels like home." Outside, my sister was waiting by the moving truck. We drove to my new apartment without talking much, both of us processing the end of one phase and the beginning of another. My new place was smaller than what I'd shared with David, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture in a place I'd chosen, every decision made without having to consider someone else's preferences or habits. For the first time in years, I could arrange my life exactly the way I wanted it. That evening, after my sister had helped me unpack the essentials and gone home, I sat on my new couch in my new living room and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete honesty. No one was hiding anything from me because there was no one else here to hide things. No one was protecting me from information because I was the only one who had access to information about my life. I thought about David and Amanda, probably spending the evening at the apartment on Elm Street without having to worry about maintaining pretenses or managing schedules. They could be completely honest with each other now, completely present, completely committed to building something real. I didn't feel jealous. Exactly. I felt something more like relief. Relief that I no longer had to wonder why David seemed distracted, or where he was spending his time, or whether I was imagining the distance that had been growing between us. I wasn't abandoned, I realized. I was released, just late enough to see who held the key all along.